Hey guys, welcome back or welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about the SAT. Basically, every American high schooler needs to take this or the ACT, and I took mine in 10th grade and I got a 5090 on my first try. My breakdown was 800 math and 790 reading. And so today I'm going to be sharing some tips, some tricks, everything you guys need to know to also do well on the SAT. Of course, a disclaimer is that the tips that work for me might not work for you. Everyone learns in different ways, and these aren't guaranteeing people 1600s or anything because everybody learns in their own way, their own pace. This is just personally what worked for me. I am not a professional. I am in 11th grade currently. I am just a student who has taken this test. I feel like so much information online are about very commercial things like advertising different AI platforms, or it's these adults telling you how to get a 1600 or how to get into Ivy Leagues. And I personally feel like I don't know how authentic it is. I don't know how real or believable it is. So I just wanted to share my own perspective on how I get the SAT. Another thing to note is I did not use any outside resources. I know a lot of people have tutors or go to learning centers. I did not do any of that. So I think these tips are going to be helpful for anybody who also doesn't really want to spend money to get a private tutor or whatnot. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is the reading section. This was my personal hell. On my first practice test, I was getting everything wrong essentially, and I was surprised because I thought my reading was pretty good. I thought I was a good student and I was confused. Now, many of you guys might relate to this, and the reason why, even though you are a smart person or you are a good student and you're still getting bad scores, is because the SAT is not a test like many others you've taken before. It is very, very objective. So if you think that you can logic your way towards an answer or you can argue for the answer you think is correct, that's just not how it works. You're not supposed to create some sort of argument or take outside knowledge and apply it to the test. This is simply between the text and yourself. The first thing that happens when you open the reading SAT section is you're met with vocabulary. Now, this is very daunting, and I think it's strategic that they place this in the front because you will lose a lot of confidence if you don't know the words, and most of the time, you won't know the words. Insanely hard truth is that no matter how much vocab you study, no matter how much you read, there is a very high possibility that the words you get are words you don't know. But do not fret, this is why it's important to practice. So when you are studying, study common roots, common prefixes, and common suffixes. This way, when you do get a word that you don't know, you can try to break it up and maybe you'll figure something out. If you do want to work on your memorization, however, I definitely recommend creating rhymes. So for example, one that has always stuck with me is countenance, and that basically means someone's facial expressions, or like the way they are perceived by others. And the rhyme was, you can count the nuts. And that sounds really weird, but there's a connection because like you can count how many like crazy people there are by looking at their faces or whatever. So these rhymes, these like images you can create for yourself, will be really beneficial in the long run if you have trouble memorizing words. Now the next part you go into is basically reading comprehension. Can you identify the main purpose, the main idea? What is the author arguing? How can you compare that to their arguments of different authors or whatever's going on? My main tip here is highlight anything you can. On Blue Book, you will have a highlight feature, and there you can highlight different portions of the text. And so therefore, if you do see something that's a key information, you can highlight it so you don't forget it. Personally, I hate to say it, but this reading comprehension section, basically questions 5 through 15, unfortunately, they are all practice. You just need to keep on doing practice tests, keep on doing practice problems. Trust me, just keep practicing because it will show up, and there's honestly no better way you can do it. It's on you to practice. However, once you get past the first 15 questions, you are in luck because questions 16, 17 maybe, and above are starting the grammar section. And this is something you can totally study for. I am a firm believer that the grammar section is one of the easiest sections on the SAT because it genuinely just relies on you knowing the grammar tips and tricks. With a simple Google search, you can figure out basically all the grammar tricks that you need to memorize. They are honestly not too far-fetched from what you learn in school. They are online. Memorize whatever you need to memorize, do whatever you need to do the practice problems, because this is the section you really want to guarantee you get full points on because it is the most predictable. Then there's also the transition portion. I think that most likely you won't struggle with this. If you do the practice problems again, but I do think that the transitions are, in general, the section that people think are the easiest because it's sort of intuitive and mostly relies on just common sense. The very last 2 or 3 questions are going to be rhetorical synthesis, and this is where you made it. This is the finish line because these are probably the easiest questions in the entire reading section. And I say this because even though there is a long chunk of text about a student's research paper or whatever, skip it. Your information is basically all in the answers and the questions. You don't care about the chunk of text. First, read the question, identify what they're asking, look through the answer options. Most of the time, there is a very obvious correct answer. However, if there are two that you're choosing between and you're like, this is weird, go back to the text because there's probably some wrong information, some wrong data in one of the 2 answer choices, and that will help you recognize it. Now, for general tips in the reading section, the first one is timing. And timing is something that stresses everyone out. I personally wish we had 3 hours for the reading section, but because you are on a time crunch, make sure when you're practicing you are using the timer. I know it's easy to take away the timer because you don't want to stress yourself out, but use a timer because you need to know your different timestamps for each section. Like, once you reach the grammar section, usually how much time you have left. And this is going to be helpful because on the actual test, you can sort of pace yourself. And again, one thing I've noticed is that a lot of people tend to start rushing near the end because they're like, shoot, I don't have that much time left. But keep this in mind. If you're going chronologically, the end of the test is one of the easiest, so it will not take you as long as the middle section will. So do not start to freak out if you're like, uh-oh, I'm halfway through the test and more than half of my time is gone, because most of the time you don't need that much time in the last section. My next general tip is it is easier to find wrong answers than it is to find right answers. So basically, I use process of elimination for every single one of my problems. There is a strikeout feature in Bluebook. I literally use that so much because it's easier to find mistakes than to find the answer they're actually looking for, especially when each answer contains so much information. So look for the answers that are too general, that use information that wasn't explicitly said in the text, or that exaggerate, or that minimize, or that just contains fake data. It's pretty easy to spot, so look for wrong answers, then you'll be left with your right one. Next, we're moving on to the math section. I will preface this with, I do have a very intense math background, so the SAT math section was not a big deal for me. I did not prep a lot for it, but I will say there were many questions that did stump me. I did have to learn how to use Desmos, and so here are the tips for that. First thing, Desmos. Everyone should learn Desmos because no matter how good you are at math, Desmos is probably better. There is a fine line that you must experience because if you're using Desmos for every single problem, you are wasting some time because not every problem needs Desmos. Most of the time, you want to use Desmos if there's something graphing, if there's something like a quadratic where it's hard to solve, plug that into Desmos. Desmos is pretty intuitive. You just write whatever you want to and put it in there and see what outputs. But one of the harder parts is the Desmos regressions. So I recommend watching a tutorial. There are many, many tutorials on Desmos regressions, probably shorter than 5 minutes even. And once you learn that, I think you're good to go for Desmos. To think that Desmos is very helpful. It's kind of like a cheat sheet for the math section, and it's not too hard to learn. The next thing is practice. So there are many, many free practice resources for the SAT math section in particular, one of them being Khan Academy. I am a hardcore Khan Academy fan. I use it a lot, and I think math especially is something that is easier to improve your score in as compared to reading, which is why I say practice. More practice questions, feel free to go to cracksat.net. This is a sketchy, weird website that I used when I was studying, but it has so many practice problems, and I'm eternally grateful. Another general tip. Use the Black Book Requisites very sparingly. You have maybe 10, and so you don't want to use all 10 of these in the beginning of your study journey because then later on you're gonna have nothing to practice with. And if you wait till last minute, you're gonna be overwhelmed by how many tests you have, and you might not even use all of them, and that's just wasting your resources. So do one every 1 or 2 weeks, depending on how much time you have. Space them out. Be your number one indicators of progress, of tracking. This is gonna be a pretty realistic score, in my opinion. I know If you're somebody that's looking for resources, I have plenty for you. The first one is the SAT Black Book. Everybody I knew who got a 1600 while I was studying for it recommended this book, and to preface, this book has no practice problems. This book is completely about testing strategies, testing mindset, and that is something that's so important, especially with a test like the SAT. So get that if you really want to get an inside perspective on how to take the test. Also, Princeton Review, the SAT. I think you should get a more updated version if you do end up purchasing the book. There's also online versions I think you can find on different websites. I use the Vocabulary Cartoons book. I love this. It's very niche, I think. I put many people on. This is how I learned most of my vocab words. For reading and writing, the reading writing section, Erica Melter books, I will say they are a little harder than what's actually on the SAT, I think, or at least they were way harder than the Blue Book practice books. And I personally appreciated that. I think that's where I got most of my practice. There's a lot of explanations, there's a lot of practice problems. I highly recommend. SAT Panda book, also used. I used that for math. Again, I did not really have to prepare a lot for math, but I think that book was very helpful. Covered a lot of basics, covered a lot of different steps, strategies, practice. Okay guys, this concludes my video, my ultimate study guide. Again, I would like to reiterate, I'm not a professional, I'm just somebody who took the test once, and let me know if there's any other sections you want me to talk about. I can talk about the PSAT, I can talk about Desmos in particular, reading in particular, math in particular, I can talk about grammar, yada yada yada. Okay, so that's it for this video guys. Let me know if you enjoyed, and yeah, I wish everybody luck in their SAT endeavors, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time.